did a lot of, I think in previous classes that were officially part of this series on the soul, we did a bunch of different things that have to do with a bunch of like hagdamas, right? About how to talk about it. And let's just jump into something and we'll see what we can do about it, if that's okay. So this is a general question for you, for our class, because my project, like supposed project, starts off with a few different. Did I give you once? Where is it even? I had a list. Oh no, I did it in the other class, and I don't see it here. I had a list of different things to do, like different things to sell, like products to sell. Now they were like this. I remember what they were. Yeah, they were all based, or mostly, or halfway, based around the fact that we all are Jewish, and we inherit this whole lot of different systems. Just like there's a system in like these stupid people that you're talking about, there's also like a system in yeshiva with everything. Everyone thinks they know, and that system is one big mess because it's sort of based on the whole, on like it's like fragments of a whole bunch of different things made into some collage, which works for some purposes, but not for intellectual purposes for the most part. So even if you want to understand that, much more if you want to actually understand the reality, then you have to sort of unravel the different strings that were woven into this world. So there's different things that we could do about this, but the central thing, or the place where it actually happens for that, is to study the primary sources that these things come from. Now, there's not really, this is in general, since I framed it this way, there's not really any primary sources for whatever they teach you in yeshiva or whatever, because the people that are teaching you didn't read any primary sources, and the problems that they have are not, they don't think in the way that those sources taught at all, and they don't, so it claims to be based on certain sources, but it's really just based on like people reading Chumash and Gemara and stuff, and like sort of backfilling whatever they think the thought has to be, or whatever they want it to be today for whatever educational reason.
There's almost like some feeling you get when you're a kid, when you're like learning Gemara, like some age, like you just wonder, like this isn't really what the Gemara is saying. You suppress the question a little bit until it goes away.
Yeah, okay, maybe, but that's a question for learning Gemara and for how the Torah itself, works. We're not even thinking. I'm thinking about what we call ashkafas or beliefs. There isn't. One of the interesting things that I've discovered when I tried to figure this out is that you cannot find. In other words, there's no way out of accepting that what is taught it might be how is it called? It might be it might work. It might be what is the word I'm looking for? Yeah, it might function. It might be appropriate for the purposes to which it's deployed. Well, depending on if you agree with those purposes, it might be appropriate for them. But it's not any shita. Like it's not like someone comes on like the story you get it often. It's like, okay, there's shita Ramban, but where's shita Ramban? Well, tell me what the shita Ramban is. And actually, there's no such thing as shita Ramban, but that's another discussion. But because I'm not here to criticize the Ramban, although I do. But especially there's even not that. In other words, if there's shita Ramban, then if it's a shita, if there's some system of thought, then it will be much closer to the Rambam, or at least in the important ways, in the ways where it's importantly different from what they teach you. So therefore, what you get taught is by definition some sort of hodgepodge of things that, as I say, they're useful for a purpose, and we did a whole class about the fact that beliefs have purposes, and this is like backwards, because in yeshiva they can tell you this. This is the biggest secret that we're not allowed to say on YouTube, because they tell you that we do these things because of their beliefs, but it's really the other way around. We really tell you the beliefs because we want you to do those things. And I think that's true, and it's true even for what they think, not just my judgment about it. I don't know if the practical moment. It's motivated by the need. For example, I'll just give a stupid example. For example, in yeshiva they tell you, and how did the Israelis say? Our Torah is what watches and the Jewish people, and not the Tzahal. Okay, nobody actually believes that, and there's no reason. There's no like. It's not like we started off with this belief and therefore we didn't go to the army. But everyone knows that the story is the other way around. There's this problem, and it's a real problem if you're actually an adult, if you know how to think about it, and that's at least if you're sort of Jewish, or if you care about this thing called the Jewish people as it has existed before the state of Israel happened, or maybe before modernity happened, however far you want to go back to, then the modern state and with all of its institutions are a danger to that. And at least the original thought was at least there should be some people to continue this yeshiva thing, which Jews have been doing for the past, 10, whatever, 200 years or 800 years or 2,000 years or whatever it is. And therefore they went to yeshiva. And then they were asked, hey, what about the armies? They said, well, they came up with a theology to justify that, but it's not the truth. And it justifies that, and it's not only justifying it in a practice. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a real point in this. The point is that we need yeshivas to exist. Now, is there a middle way? Maybe there's a middle way. You can ask Hesder yeshivas if it worked out. Maybe there's a middle way. I don't know. Or maybe just there's no way. It's still not moral what you're doing. All these things might be correct, but I'm just getting at the point that the thoughts were created in order to justify certain, not only actions, but certain ways of life or certain things they want you to do. And therefore, you tell me you backfilling theology, what I call. It's not really, although people might think, oh, we believe this, and therefore we learn. It's not true. We want to learn, and therefore we believe that the Torah is what keeps up the world. Now, why do we learn? There is a belief, right? There is a second, we do believe that learning is important, but that's maybe slightly more subtle than saying, well, it keeps up the world, it holds up the world. Before. Yeah. In other words, and abstractly, yeah. It is important to learn, and I think there's, you could make, if you really want, you can make secular arguments for it, or general humanistic arguments for it. It's not like very hard, but that's not, for whatever reason, they don't think that will work, So they try to say whatever works. Now, point being, okay, I don't know where I didn't mean to get into this, but point being that if you want to unravel what you were told, at least the only thing that you could really do, or the basic method or the basic practice that we can do, is to read the sources where it really does come from, and then maybe some people will say that it's still important to have people not go to the army, so we're gonna still tell them this lie. Okay, no problem. Or maybe they'll realize that's not necessarily so, because at some point people really start to believe it, and that's where it becomes very weird. But basically, that's my basic goal, or my basic action. The basic action. And the problem is that this leads to it opens a lot of questions. But the basic thing is, so let's understand. Let's read the Rambam and whoever argues. Read the Zohar, read the Rambam, read anyone else. Try to figure out what they're saying, what the reasons for what they're saying is. Right? That's what we call Ian. That's why I call my thing Ian Lamachshava. That was. I don't like the word because it's not grammatical and it's a mistake. But I'm not getting into it. But the point was, just like when you learn Halacha be'Ian, it's not about back engineering that the lamdas should match something that we need to do. It's about understanding why people said things that they said, and why this shitta said that, and why that shitta says this.
That's probably why the separation of those two is very important. In Gemara,
separation
of yeshiva, there's absolutely no halachic objection.
Yeah, and that's at least the first. At least maybe afterwards you want to make halacha. I mean, the Chazon Ish didn't agree with that, but maybe at some point you're going to make halacha out of it. But I'm saying, in principle, it has to exist. And in theory, it has to exist because you're not interested in. It's not about finding out the halacha. Maybe the halacha is what happens after this. That's another discussion. Or maybe in yeshivas they just decided that halacha has nothing to do. That part is not.
So I thought it was always the latter.
Yeah, but that's that.
I thought that helps because then you can learn Gemara freely.
Yeah, but then why don't you make the halacha as freely? There's not a clear, simple answer to that question. Or maybe
it jeopardizes, like you said,
it might. The Chazon Ish doesn't think they have this problem. So, for example, he definitely thinks that you should make halacha as freely as you could think. Of course, he thinks in very conservative ways. So, but he still in principle holds that and does that and teaches people to do that. So I don't know that that's such a big issue. But in thought, what I'm saying is something slightly different. What I'm saying is that when you are trying to think, you cannot. Thinking is never about coming to certain conclusions or knowing the words. In other words, what my big claim is, one of the first slogan is that in yeshiva world there is Ian for halacha, but for hashkafa or for amina, they don't do any Ian. They only do if they do anything, it's in the sense of like what are the dogmas that we need to believe. It's lecha halacha lemaisa, like Shmiras Shabbos Kelchasa of thought, and that's just not thought. That's halacha. Maybe it's important. I don't know. Like you're saying, maybe yeshivas are right for ignoring halacha and letting whoever thinks he knows halacha decide halacha. Maybe I'm not so convinced of that. But maybe, but the problem is that, like I said many times, again, if you're going to yeshiva, so in nigla or whatever you want to call halacha, you have this. Everyone understands that if you want, let's do something like this. If you want to understand the halacha, right? If someone comes and says, "Well, why is Zilcha Shabbos work like this?" or "What is the idea of it?" right? There's no way to work with. Well, we must keep Shabbos in such and such ways, or we must come to such and such conclusions. What we must do is to read the primary sources and see what logic is moving them, and then you understand. Then you have a theory of what it's about. Now, right?
Yeah, no, but
what you're not doing.
Something slightly different, I think.
I understand.
No, what I'm saying is when in yeshiva, when you learn Gemara and you learn whatever you're learning, Rashba, Ritzvah, whatever it is, the goal is and the benchmark for it is the svara, right? Meaning it is the logic of the Gemara.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to halacha already, we assume that there's some abstract way of deriving halacha that's not svara motivated. Right?
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I think that's true. What historically happens.
The Gemara that seems to be perfectly clear and seems to, or at least it's Nirvaniya Staiti that Rush was right and whoever it was, Ritzvah got it completely wrong. The svara is just bad. That's not going to change the halacha in yeshiva, right? Even if I can support my argument.
But wait, I agree with that. I mean, in fact, that's true.
Right.
It's only halfway true though, because in yeshiva they don't teach you to decide halacha because they're not interested in that. But the Litvish poskim traditionally did do this. If you read Aruch HaShulchan, if you read Ramay Feinstein, if you read Rav Henkin, if you read any traditional Litvish posik, they all learned the Gemara and then said whatever they thought the Gemara says to be the halacha.
Does this happen now in the average Rav of a shul?
No, yeah. But it basically does not happen. If you go to Lakewood, the people that learn halacha in Lakewood, it does not happen. And it's actually very interesting that it does not happen. There's some students of people like Ramesh Feinstein or these other old Litvish Rabbanim that still do that. There's definitely people that do it in general. But in general, in the Amami halacha, even Yeshivish halacha, Rabbi Forsheim doesn't do that. No, he just reads whatever it says someone else said, and I'm not sure why. I think I do know why, but I'm not going to say it's not nice. But point being, I don't think that becomes out of ideal. That mostly happened because for factual reasons. Yeah, it mostly happened. Moshe 100%. If you read Shivas, he could totally ignore the entire tradition and say, well, he learned the Gemara and he thinks like this, and yeah, he definitely does. The Chaznish does this, but officially does it, and so on. The other poskim in different areas do it less, but the Litvish poskim all used to actually do this. Even Chaim Brisker, by the way, used to paskin according to his svara, unlike what his grandson would make you believe.
Which grandson?
All of them. Okay. But what I was saying, but that happened for historical reasons, I think, because the yeshivish didn't focus on this, and therefore halacha fell to the people that didn't learn yeshiva in the yeshivish way, and therefore the yeshivas are in a schizophrenia because of in this way. I don't think it's real, and of course there is a real reason, like they would tell you, because we're not so sure of our svura as being true as we are sure of, relying on what some other guy said. Yeah, but I'm not sure. Like you say, maybe I'm actually more sure of my svara being true than of that guy's koyach achra or whatever you want to call it. Not sure. That's a good question. But anyways, ideally, you could have these points. What I'm saying is, but the point, what I'm talking about is in the way of learning. In the way of learning, everyone agrees. Basically, everyone agrees that if you want to understand how it works, you're not going to be focused on needing. That's never a way to understand. You might say, okay, linyam psak, I'm not relying on my own shikla das. That's a political question. That's a fair question besides for that.
They wouldn't even say assertively, I think that the halacha is like this because whatever, I'm not going to do it because I'm not as confident in my theory.
Halfway. It's not so. It's more complex than that. It's more complex than that. Rosh Hashiva is just their job is not to pass halacha in general, so they're not interested in working on that. And the Rabbanim, their job are not Rosh Hashiva, so they don't know how to learn. That's just what happens in the Litvish world for the most part. The Rabbanim that do know how to learn, some of them do say this, and some of them are trained in to be very much yirah and very afraid of thinking. Okay, these are just factual things. I don't think you could make a broader argument. I don't think it's based on that. I think it's just based on how it happens. I don't think they would tell you. Not, in other words, not like you said that they think that for halacha there's a different system of figuring out. I don't really think so. I think that they think there's the same system. It's true that since yeshiva they often ignore like all the achronim to say whatever they want in the sugya, and then that's not the halacha has already incorporated all these achronim, so you can't really just ignore them if you're part of the tradition. But that's even in between achronim you should be able to do this, and I think the reason is for most of the time it's because most little poskim or whatever they don't really know, never learned or don't know enough, so they do the safest thing, which is to tell you whatever the Rav Auerbach did. But Rav Auerbach himself, he did read the Gemara and decide what he thought was correct. You see. Anyways, but the point is being that at least in halacha we agree that there's such a thing as understanding, which is distinct from just figuring out what we need to do. In other words, there's a reason, like you're saying, even when we do learn the sugya, we're not worried about, wait, but this means I'm going to be able to be a guy or whatever. Because that would make you very worried. That would make you not able to understand. Like, whatever, exactly. We're not worried about that even. Like, just thinking of the theory. If you're halachic, but if you're a lam, then you could think you go yeshiva and Masechta Sivama, it's like, maybe you don't have to marry a Jew, whatever. It's the whole machlokes of Shainim, it's the Raisa, the Ravana, it's a minig, maybe, I don't know. I'm just saying. And of course, and the reason why we can understand that in a clear way is because when we're learning, we're not worried, wait, your daughter is going to marry a guy. No, this is learning. Yeah, it frees you from that. Now, in Agoda or in Machshava, firstly, what we do not do, or the yeshivas don't do any learning at all. If they do anything, it's halacha l'maaseh. Although they pretend to give you nice theories and stuff, but they're not giving you the theory of the theory. They're just giving you, thou shalt believe such and such. So therefore, it's like only learning Mishnah Berurah or only learning Kitzah Shulchan Aruch. No, there's a history for that. Not for real reasons, because the Muslim movement needed books, and they found whichever book they could use. They Muslim movement had their own theology. The reason the yeshivas, what the Muslim books they learn in yeshivas are all inheritance from the Rebbe Zilson and his students. And what happened was, as far as I can tell, is they had their own theories. They were very modern people, and they actually did do a lot of thinking, and they used sources, whatever they could find, but it's not like they followed some school of thought that's traditional in Judaism or anything like that. They would just make up stuff by themselves. Also, very Litvish. If you read the Rebbe Zilson and his students, they could say, the Zohar says this, and the Ramban says like this, and I think like this, and move on. And this is therefore I will teach all my students like this. And because they were trying to recreate an ethical tradition in Judaism, which they did not exist, at least not in a living way in their day. So what they did was they went back to any Rishon or Achten that was accepted as a great gadol, and that wrote something about Musar or something like that, and just used all those books. So they could use Nashim Achas Temed Vayr from the Ramak, and Shara Gedish from Chaim Vital, and Chavis Lavovis, and Shara Shir from Rabbi Yaina, and Shmona from the Rambam. And these are all the canon of Yeshivish Musar, and none of them have the same ideas of what you should do even. Not only are the theology is different, their Musar is different. But for the Muslim movement, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, still Shurim from the Ramchal. And they used, some of it they just used to whatever the Nusach goes. And some of them they actually learned, but it's like a big mish. They don't care. They don't care about this. At least some of the Muslims actually did. Interestingly, some of the Muslims actually did understand the differences, and because they learned these books and they actually got it. But for the most part, or at least what you get in yeshiva is not that. Just like there's a shelf of Musar books, and just because they literally went at random, not at random, but found anyone that was considered important that wrote a Musar book.
It's also nice to have for your movement, the source literature.
Yeah, they needed that. They needed that, and they did do a lot of cut and paste. Like this guy says this, and that proves this, and that. Yeah, but that's. Anyways, where did I get to? So, but you don't do any Ian, and like I said, there's some Musarniks that did some Ian. Now there's a reason for it, or there's a problem with doing that, which is that it's much harder to keep the separation. And it's very hard for someone. I don't think it's impossible. I actually think it's needed, like you're saying, because we need to be able to think freely without being hit on the head by this thing. You're being a kafir or something like that. Just like we need to be able to learn the Shabbos without someone saying, "Well, you're mechal Shabbos." And actually, the halachas that are like this, there's actually some halacha controversies that end up looking like this. If you learn about Heter Mechira and Shmita, then basically everyone that's Haredi cannot learn it straight because there's some Kashkofa banging on their head saying, well, you're going to be a Mizrachist if you, okay, and therefore, it's Machlek, it's not but still, I still, yeah. And other things, thankfully, there's not everything has something like that going on. But in thought, it's actually much harder because most people think that it's very hard to think, okay, this is what I understand, but then I still believe something else. That's almost a contradiction. Almost a contradiction, not entirely a contradiction. There's ways to get out of this problem. But that's one of the reasons why they don't do it. And actually, one of the reasons why I don't really think, and I really don't think that for halacha either, and ideally at least, but I don't think that it's really possible to say, I learned, the Rambam, and because there's a rive against him or something like that. It's not a halacha like him. It's not really possible to say it's not a halacha because that's what you think. If that's what you think, that's what you think. It is possible if you have certain theories about, like what we discussed. If you understand that certain beliefs that are given to the hamoin, right, to the masses, are because of them leading to certain actions, and there isn't a better way to do it, and things like that. Then you could still sort of conform in some way and say there's halacha and there's a true thought. But you're still going to think the true thought and not be worried about what you need are to think. That's not... anyways. So that's really what I'm trying to do. Now, the second level of what happens when... This is just one way to get this, but more broadly, what happens is, you could do this limit, let's learn Rambam and Rav Sadigon and the Chovos HaLevavos and figure out what each one says and why they say it, and how the pieces move together, and then you could sort of trace how they fall into different parts of what's accepted nowadays, how these filter down to what people hear and invent their own systems out of. I think that's a worthwhile thing because it gives you a lot of clarity. That's the first thing. First thing in thought is to have clarity, because everything is so jumbled up. You need to be able to figure out what's even going on, and that's a lot of work. You need a lot of bakiyas for that, and a lot of historical tracing. It's the whole avodah. And then there is what actually happens, and this second step basically never happens. Most people that do this, which is to get interested in the truth, and that means that if you, for example, if you trace we think about the soul, and you trace the different theories of the soul, and you realize that this is really about, it all goes back to things that, and I say this historically, although it's not necessarily a historical point, but it all goes back to things that Plato and Aristotle and their friends thought about, which means it goes back to the most basic thoughts that people can have about what the world is, or how the world works, or how it's understood, and what's called metaphysics and things like that. And then you become interested just in that question itself. Then you become just a philosopher, and not so much even a Jewish philosopher. Because Jewish philosopher is a weird term because it doesn't mean anything. Because either it's true or it's not true. But I think that most people, when they say this in a very weird way, where it's well, it's true that you should be a Litvak, so therefore you should be a Chassid. Yeah, we could find all of these things, and there might be a real way. Yeah, there might be a real way. There might be a real way. In other words, the real way. No, the real way. Okay, I can't do this. The real way is because to be Jewish, that you could only be. No, if you're a shtickle philosopher, then you can only be a Jewish philosopher, because the only real way, the only point of being Jewish, or at least in thought, you could say I'm Jewish, because I belong to this community or whatever. Okay, but as long as you're Jewish, somewhat in thought, it's because you think there's some truth in Judaism. So you're a Jewish philosopher in the same sense as there is Aristotelian philosophers, and nobody says that's a contradiction in terms, because what is this, a school? Either it's true or it's not true. Well, yeah, it's true when I sort of subscribe more or less to the ideas of these schools, or at least some of the important ideas and so on. And if Jewish has some ideas, whatever they are, they might be the same as the ideas that philosophers have, like most Rishonim actually thought. And most have thought about this, that there is a God, that God has some sort of relationship with the world in certain ways. Basically, that's all. These are things that philosophers, for many of them, agree with, and at least think of in the same. And they don't have any need to take the Chovos HaLevavos and the Rambam didn't have any need to say that my belief in God is different than my neighbor, the Muslims, believe in God, or my neighbor, the Aristotelian guy, believes in God. They literally thought that it was the same thing. Now there's some differences, and we think that we have a better way of approaching it, and we put on tzitzis and they don't, and therefore that somehow is better. Okay, but those are details. But in that sense, they're really a Jewish philosopher. So if you believe in the identity of at least certain philosophical thoughts with the identity of Jewish teaching, right, then you are a Jewish philosopher, but in the real sense, not only in or in a, like some sort of weird. But the point being that then the more interesting thing is then you're a philosopher, which is still different than being a normal person. Normal person, like in the sense of normies. And being a philosopher is the guy that is curious about the truth of how the world works. And then you would literally, you see, like most people when they I need to get across this point. You probably understand it, but it's important for me because I think that it's like it's like really having a different level in your soul. Okay, this is a language that nobody likes. But what I mean to say is, like most people, for example, they found the Chavos HaLevavos and the Rambam. They all said, well, they had the statement of Shema Emes V'Misha Amre, right? Truth is true, no matter who said it. Okay, and most people see it like this. Okay, thankfully, first I went to this closed-minded yeshiva, and they taught me that whatever the Goyim says is bad, and Aristotle really ate pigs or rabbits, whatever the Baba Ma says about him. And because he said that a triangle doesn't need a geometry doesn't have to be a triangle, so ethical philosophy doesn't mean the ethical. This mass that I did tell you. Okay. Anyways, which has never happened. It's not true. Anyways, he definitely doesn't hold like that. Anyway, but maybe it happened. I don't know. I wasn't there, but just made up story. Point being, they teach you all these things where these guys, everyone who's not living in 6th Street is bad, and then you find out, well, the Rambam actually thought that some Goyim were smart, and even like basically all of our ideas are stolen from them, or a lot of them. And then you're like, okay, so now I'm over, now I'm over like now I'm smarter than all the guys in yeshiva. Now I figured out this. Problem is that you're still living in the wrong world. You're still not living in the philosophical world when you're thinking all of this, all these thoughts. All of these thoughts are still exist only in the dogmatic world, or I don't know what to call it. You need to call it the world of the people that don't care about the truth for itself. And caring about the truth for itself is literally something unnatural. Unnatural at first. It's natural for the intellect or for the soul, but it's not natural for the way human beings live. Yeah, I understand that. That's all cool and whatever. Maybe it's a step in something.
That's usually the first level of interest. Somebody says, "Oh, and sometimes it's also soulless. I could be from a yid and still believe that there's no."
Yeah, exactly. But all of this is that's true. I know. All of this is working in the world of like, in the social world. I don't know how to call it. That's why I have this image of worlds, which I got from the Kabbalah, which seems to be very helpful for me. Like, which world are you living in? Because it's literally like that. I think that the Kabbalah talking about different worlds existing is a very useful image, whatever exactly they meant. Because there's like really people that are walking in the same street and they just don't have the same street. Because there's different connections for them and different meanings for everything and different things that are important and not important. And it's just a different world. I don't have a better world. It's a metaphorical world because it's still factually, in the same universe, but it's a different world. And I think people use the world in this way. So therefore, the world of people that are this whole discussion, most of took up people that are curious, right? People that are going to come to our class. Most of them at first, or like not saying this because nobody should come, just saying this because most of the people that even the people that do come and people that at least at the beginning, most of the people, including me, not just most of the people are still playing this game. Now, of course, there might be a good way of playing it because if you're taught that this is the truth, then you want. I'm not saying that it's entirely false, but from the perspective of the truth, from the perspective of a philosopher, like the philosophical life, what's called, which is a kind of life, it's a kind of human being. Besides, there's a kind of human being called a philosopher. In other words, a lover of wisdom, because we shouldn't use this word philosopher because it gives people too many ideas. But the people that are called lovers of wisdom, right, or friends of wisdom might be a nicer translation. Friends of wisdom are people that love wisdom, or love knowledge, or however you want to call it, or love truth, or you could even say love beauty and love coherence. I don't know. For those people, they really want to read anything that they think might get them close to the truth. Okay, so if you're stupid and you think that, okay, and therefore the only thing that can get me close to the truth is books printed in Hebrew with these like purple and gold covers. Okay, then I understand that there's still some work to be done on that level. But once you're already past that, then you're not interested in the fact that, the Rambam said that some Goyim are smart. Okay, and if the Rambam wouldn't have said it, they wouldn't be smart. And the whole point of the Rambam saying this is to get you past the Rambam said. Right. It's not relevant what he said. It's relevant that there's some people that are curious about the world and are working through it, and there's no reason to think. And they might have something, maybe they don't. So, but if you're curious, if you care about knowing, then you're going to chase them and try to ask them, teach you.
The takeaway from Rambam is that the only relevant criteria for judgment is the truth, right? Not the Misha Amrei.
Yes.
The only reason why you should believe the emes is because it doesn't matter the Misha Amrei.
Yeah, yes. No, this is, but that's, you see, when you say it like that, you say it a little. I don't want to focus on that point because that makes it a little more too simplistic for me. Because of course the truth is the only criteria for truth, and also of course when you say it this way, of course it's also true. Because that's why I like to say the lovers of wisdom or friends of wisdom, because then people, what often happens with people that have that simple statement in their head is that they say, okay, and therefore I'm gonna read no one and listen to no one and talk with no one, because the only thing that matters is the truth. And I'm just gonna sit here in my armchair and think about the truth, or read the 2 books that I ever read and know the truth, and it doesn't matter what says or who says. That's why I use the word philosophia, right? The lover or searcher of wisdom, where you love knowledge or love wisdom, and therefore you seek it out, right? It's not enough to say the truth is the only criteria, because that's way too easy to say. It's way too easy, and I'll say it in a simpler way. It causes people to disregard authority, and that's not true. Of course, it's not true, like what's called the fallacy of arguments from authority, right? Arguments from authority are obviously not a proof for anything, right? But authority, in the sense of learning from other people, the word authority might not be relevant, is the only way people get to the truth. I think most people, at least, unless you really convince that you're the smartest human being to ever live, which seems to be pretty dumb. So that's why I don't say that, because many people that go around with this like, the only criteria is truth, and then they end up very stupid because they're not actually lovers of wisdom. They just use this as another way to like back up their own nishigas that they thought of for 3 minutes in the toilet, and now they know the truth of the universe. That's not a way. So I think the lover of wisdom or lover of knowledge is a more succinct way of talking about it. And that's why, and that is actually something that is a different kind of human being. That's actually something that's a different kind of person. And I really think it's a different kind of person. And like you say, it comes with humility. It comes literally, like the ancients and the Rambam all believe that a criteria for knowledge is to have good midas, right? And nobody nowadays, most people read it and like, well, that's just a religious belief. No, it's not a religious belief. That's true. At least in this, it's true even in an essential sense, because loving of wisdom means not loving it more than yourself, right? It means loving it more than being right in the argument, which means that if you're a lover of wisdom, if you're at least, and when you're talking to people that might know something more than you're going to be quiet most of the time. And most of the people that are running around saying the only criteria is the truth, they don't listen to anyone ever, which just disqualifies them, and it's a bad midah. It might just come from from loving to win arguments more than loving the truth, and that's a very good, actually a very good sign for knowing who's a sophist, right? Who's not a philosophist. You see, sophist. This is the great branding that Socrates came up with, or whoever it was, maybe Plato. Where there's sophist and there's philosophist. And sophists, they're just smart. They're the wise guys, right? Not the wise guys, the wise people. Wise guys is something different than wise people somehow. Anyways, but they are the wise guys, actually, according to Socrates. And sophists are the people that pretend to know, right? And Socrates was going around saying that if you pretend to know, you, by definition, don't know anything. And he sort of likes proving it by asking them 3 questions where they contradict each other and saying, well, I win. Point being that he created this great branding where sophists are the people, the most, and this is also what Socrates said, right? The most, the most salient attribute of sophists was that they know how to win arguments. This is literally what they went around, at least according to Socrates, right? What they literally the shingle hanging on the sophist door.
There's an argument between.
There's a lot of arguments. I don't remember. Yeah, there's a lot of good dialogues about this. That's why you should read Plato, not as a Musar book. It's a great Musar book for the life of philosophy. In other words, for this weird
style of having a passion for.
Yeah, exactly. We're caring about what wisdom, and one of his big points is about
wisdom is that which is true and correct about the world.
Probably, maybe also the correct way of acting in the world, and maybe also the correct way of understanding what is true and correct. It's not only about of course, but I'm saying it's not enough to say I could recite to you the encyclopedia updated one. That's not.
Right, no, but I'm saying is even still Aristotle's understanding of the world is once you understand it properly.
But Socrates, at least Socrates taught this. Aristotle is actually a little more complicated. Okay, because I'm not going to do this. I'm trying to finish my speech. I don't know. My message was. I don't know why I'm doing this. I like it. Anyways, what was I saying? Oh, so a sophist is a guy that could win arguments. That's his job. In other words, a lawyer. Or in other words, a guy like whatever all these people whose job is to go on YouTube and win arguments, which is just a very simple way of showing that you don't care about truth. It's very clear. That's why all the people that we talked about before, since their big shtick is winning arguments, that just shows that they're not interested in wisdom.
I mean, in Plato, he does.
Socrates' shtick is also winning arguments, so you might be complicated. But
but even in at least in the Plato, when I was reading in Plato, is the right. It's your pursuit is even in a different skill set. Right, you're looking for polemical tricks and tactics to trip people over their words, and not in a way that necessarily seeks consistency.
That's the obvious conclusion of this, right? The people that are going around saying, I could debate any whatever and win, they don't only mean to say they might use rhetorical tricks. That's one of the criticisms.
The method of knowledge collection is different here also. It's not what's true and correct. It's more of what
I understand, but that's a big that's already talking about like how literally your methods are not optimized. Your tools, in other words, that's a very important argument that we have about rhetoric. And it goes back to what we were saying before, where rhetoric, the problem with rhetoric is that it's not a tool optimized. It's not a tool made for grasping truth. It's a tool made for winning arguments, and therefore being the best guy at rhetoric, sort of what? Yeah. In other words, being like the best debater or whatever it is sort of just proves that, well, it might be useful in some cases, but that's your claim to fame, then you're sort of advertising yourself as a guy that's not selling the truth. He's selling something else.
That out loud. I'm saying none of them are going to say it out loud that I study the world.
Well, some of the rhetoric, some of the sophists that Plato quotes actually said that out loud, because in those days people were more honest. Georgius, he was the guy that went around saying I could teach anyone to win any argument.
Right, that's what it was.
Anyways, but or other people have got a famous sophist that he quotes. But what I'm saying is that this is the second level where we aspire to, and I think that this is a level of, and then it's a good question what happens at this level to all the different things where we started off with, but I think that this is a level of, and for this level, I'll tell you something interesting that happens. Both you start being interested in learning everything. Right? So the first thing that we were saying, it's two opposite things. Like the first thing we were saying is something like, well, why would I read some random guy from the 20th century who claims to know the truth when I could read, the Rishonim who actually in an organized way try to figure out what's going on. And in some sense, that's a very good idea for the level of rhetoric, for the level of not only rhetoric, but for the social level and all of that, religious level. But then in the truth level, everything, all of these distinctions somewhat collapse. You still might say that some people have more to tell me than others, but it becomes a lot more. Basically, the whole world becomes open because now you want to learn, and if someone from the 20th century has something to say, I'll definitely listen to him. And actually, when you actually listen to the truth, not to the truth content of it, and not to late modern people are very, very interested in showing that I'm the first one that ever thought about this. Okay, either you're the first one or not, who cares? Then I think in some sense, then the big puzzles that people they've been puzzled by them for a long time. And are there better ways now, scientifically or philosophically or mathematically or whatever, to think of them? Sometimes yes, sometimes not. But I think that this is this is where we need to get, and this is where we regain respect for a lot of people that even when I'm disagreeing with them, even when I'm saying, well, you obviously didn't think this through, or you didn't learn this book correctly, you're totally messed up. I'd have a lot of real respect for both the fact that if you seem to be interested in wisdom, or seem to be selling wisdom in some sense, not only selling winning arguments, which some people do, and maybe even for good reasons, and also for putting some of that into the world, for teaching people things that are true, or that it's somewhat true. Somewhat true is good. It's better than entirely false. I mean. Okay, so anyways, that's what did I want with this whole Agdama? Oh, so that's all preface for learning some of Sadigon. Anyways, I don't know how to connect it. If Sadigon was you want to finish?
No, absolutely not.
No, so since we started, so back to where we are. Since we started with the questions of the soul, and we sort of discussed the questions in an earlier class a little bit, so we can do these two things, which we just described. One is to sort of figure out where all the idea of the soul. And actually, I find that extremely useful, especially for the context that we live in, because you start to sort things out. And then to sort of through that, and I think the Rishonim are actually very useful for that also, because of them, most of them at least, the ones that we consider philosophers, other ones yesh la'ayin, but the ones that we consider philosophers, because they are at least somewhat conscious of where the ideas came from, both historically and like reason, like what their reasons are, and what even the great thing about them is, even Rav Sadigon is the first one, or at least the first great one that we have, and that's amazing level of honesty, which I'm almost unmatched by anyone since then. Although he does do a lot of polemic for the sake of polemic. I can't say that he does. He does do rhetoric, but he's very honest. At least if you follow through what he's saying, he's very honest in saying, even when he says something, this is not really proven rationally. This we just believe because someone told us, or whatever, because we believe in the tradition and prophecy and so on. That's an extremely beautiful clarification to make that I think that most people actually don't have. This is another point. That most people, and even the people that pretend like we're not from the Chakira Shitta, we're from the Munaf Shitta Shitta, they're actually not, because they never would admit to the fact that they might think differently, or that someone might reasonably think differently. You see, that the Munaf Shitta Shitta, or the Mina, Tachlit Shitta, Munaf Shitta is actually a third Shitta. I'm not getting into this. There's a whole other series of classes that have to happen, or have happened at some point. There's in Rav Sadigon, and famously in his Akdama, where which you should read, and maybe you should read, where he sort of goes through the sources of truth, what he calls 4 sources of truth, in a very beautiful way, and it shows you. I can't get into all of this, but the big point of it is because he gives you a general epistemology, which he calls sources of truth, and he says, in other words, nowadays this is also goes back to the second point that I was making, just another example of it. When you go in yeshiva and they tell you, well, there's goyim that think like this because they only use their own cycle and they don't believe God or whatever, like the Ramban says, but Aristotle wants. And then there's us that have simple faith that whatever it says in the book is true, right? Now this whole thing gets presented as some sort of like religious story, some sort of like musishmus, But actually, when you read Rav Sadigon, and he actually sort of says the same thing, not the same exact thing, but he talks about these different sources of truth, 3 of which are rational. One is tradition, right? 3 rational ones are the senses, and then he has 2 for things that we I'm trying to remember, things that we know immediately, basic intuitions we could call them, or what Aristotle called them. First thought, something like that. Things like that truth is bad.
Sense perception.
Yeah, a separate thought. There's one source. Yeah, it's not. It's separate. It's independent. So like the fact that everyone seems to know that one and one. That
stuff like.
Yeah. What we call a priori stuff like the whole is greater than its parts, or stuff like contradiction can't be true. Those things don't have a source anywhere besides for like some sort of basic knowing. Or you could call it intuition. Yeah, there's later philosophers have, but this is categorization. I'm just getting to it. Yeah, the question if it's really, but anyways, I can't get into all of this. And the third thing is logic, where you use these two earlier things to like figure out what are the other things that must be true because, right? So logic, or that's what he calls it, basically. And the fourth thing is tradition. And to him, this is very important because he tells you that this is not like a story. Look, there's Goyim and there's Yidden, and all this like whole moralistic story. It's very simple. If you think about human knowledge has these, let's divide it. In general, we can divide it into two, right? But before getting into all the irrational parts, human knowledge has different sources. You go around to anywhere in the world, you ask, where do you know this? Either someone told me, or I saw it, or thought it, or figured it out myself. That's all there is. But now you start to realize that the question of accepting tradition is really a human question. It's not a religious question. It's not like, do you believe in the Torah? No, there's a general question of part of, it's very reasonable, and you could not even getting into making like polemical arguments. It's actually a basic part of knowledge, to some of your knowledge being what we would call secondhand, like received knowledge. Received knowledge is a basic part of the human experience, a basic part of any epistemology, actually. Now, of course, if you want to talk about that, what are the criteria for that? How do you decide which one to believe? Oh, these are all fair questions, and he might want to make you arguments.
Have a way of identifying
Yeah, he does. Yeah, definitely does. He definitely asks what happens when they contradict. He definitely also has some sort of theory, which not very elaborated, unfortunately, which traditions you should believe. But the point being, if you go to yeshiva, like, well, we believe this tradition, and everyone else is crazy. Well, everyone else also has traditions, right? And everyone else also has thought, and we also believe thought. So nobody ever thinks to like clarify even these things. They're just one like nice moral parable.
That's a problem, right?
Yeah, whatever it is. No, so and if you're Rav Sadia, so okay, so he actually had his thought worked out. He said like it's actually normal. He actually tries to prove that it's natural to believe in testimony. What do you call it? Believing testimony. It's actually a natural thing, and if it would be unnatural, humans wouldn't by nature accept testimony. In other words, it's if you like sort of look into the.
Is it a naturalistic appeal, this argument, that there's something?
Yeah. You do too much modern philosophy now. I'm not saying how he's. Yeah, it's like. In other words, if you think, I'm trying to get at, if you think about the human mind, like how do humans know things? One of the ways humans know things are by hearing it from other people. And that seems to us to be a correct way of knowing. Of course, it has criteria. It might be weaker in some ways than the others. There might be real differences. I'm not getting into a lot of the ways of explaining actually what the difference is. But it's not like simply, it's not that, in other words, what the main point is, you don't have to be religious or something to think of Messiah as being a thing. Messiah is a thing. It's just part of.
No one told Einstein to get to where he did with them.
Yeah, whatever. Well, that's not exactly a good proof for this argument. But I don't want to talk about this. Just I always say things that I don't want to talk about. It's not nice. I should talk about it. Point is, his way of I think this is very eye-opening because it shows you how this is a very general human question. Now it doesn't. It's not like not everything is like focused on some halacha lamasa. Therefore, do what the Mishpah says. That's not what it's about. And and I think and he definitely says that this is a fair question. Do we believe this one? And what do we do if something obviously contradicts what we see? Well, obviously we don't believe it. He's very clear about that. Okay, what do we do when it's it's on the border of? Then we get into controversies, 100%. And he very much even here, and it's very beautiful. And in other words, it's not that we're the only normal ones. It's not that everyone else is crazy. It's not that everyone is irrational. Obviously, and in other words, going back to what I was starting to say, obviously, if someone tells you, even when he tells you something that this he believes because it says in the book, because of tradition, very clearly would tell you, and it's very reasonable for someone not to believe it. In other words, if nobody else, if you didn't receive this book, if you don't seem to take it seriously for cultural reasons or whatever it is, you probably will not believe it. And if you ask me to sort of prove it to you rationally, I can get you so far. I can prove that it's not crazy, but I can't really make you believe it. And this is like really extreme honesty that you wouldn't get from anyone. I don't know any kirov or whatever Archin guy that goes around saying, look, we could sort of prove you that it's not crazy to be a Jew, but we can't really tell you that it's true, not necessarily. Or certain things like Chesem, who knows? They don't even talk about it. They just ignore things that are not convenient for them. But nobody could, things like that. So they all use whatever. They all try to use certain shortcuts, but totally. Anyways, Hadi Gono is a very good example for someone that's very honest in this way, and therefore clarifies both. And he's always continually clarifying. His whole book of Mitzvot is more about clarifying the limits of what he knows and what can be known rationally and what cannot be known rationally. And the Rambam has different opinions about some certain things. He thinks that are Afsadeh thought they were rational. They're not really rational. Okay, these are machlekes. But I think even the Rambam doesn't match his honesty in this way. or his clarity in these points. So what did I want from this? So going back to my two earlier things. So therefore, it both shows you, and since he has this clarity where he's very clear of like why, or at least if you read him closely, you figure out why certain things he says sort of just come out of the tradition, and as long as he doesn't have a good enough reason to reinterpret it or something, he's going to stay with it. And why, therefore later tradition receives a lot of things from him, or he's also one of the great sources that people don't know of. And why certain thoughts that he thinks, and then he has this thing of quoting other people's opinions, at least in certain important areas, and showing you why they thought what they thought and why he thinks they're wrong in purely rational terms, in purely reasonable terms. So that's and then that opens you up to start thinking about things in himself sometimes, which is not entirely his purpose of his book, but it's at least a use that we can make. Yeah, he only halfway thinks that's a point, because it's not clear if he really believes in philosophy of sadhya in the sense of thinking things by yourself. He might only think that it's useful to to be a Jew, but that's another discussion. Okay, but he does sometimes say that it's useful. So So this is why I want to learn him, and I actually figured out that some of the most basic thoughts that you found running through the entire tradition, the entire Jewish tradition, more or less were articulated by him first, and not only first, but in the most clear way. It's amazing how I don't know why. I was talking about this with someone yesterday. I don't know why so much of the Jewish tradition just hates clarity. Never could tell you exactly what they're saying. I don't know why. My suspicion is just because they didn't go to this schools where they taught clarity. That's my opinion, but I don't know if that's entirely true. I mean, I don't know if that's enough, because I do think that if you do what used to be called the trivium, right? If you learn grammar, rhetoric, and logic, then whatever you're gonna do, and this was considered, even with the Christians, was considered to be neutral knowledge. It's not later things that can be specific to certain beliefs or certain philosophies, but these basic things up to logic, logic, rhetoric, and grammar, basically, which were all thought to be more or less the same thing. Not rhetoric in your sense, rhetoric and slightly different, although they did read Aristotle's rhetoric for that and things. Were understood to be basic. Before you do any work of knowledge, you need to know this. It's high school level or whatever, first level, and
which was had a write and speak in a way that produces clear.
It's not for them. The goal of logic was not clarity. This is a modern goal of philosophy.
About the world, right?
The goal was to sort of know what proofs are and what sentences are, and the building blocks. Exactly, right. Yeah, whatever, all these things. Now, I think that most Jews that we read never went to university or anything like it, and in yeshiva it was never, for whatever reason, these books never entered the curriculum, although they should have. And according to me, not because of the philosophy. Of course, we should not. Nobody has thrive in philosophy, but because they should stop. So stop before just read the logic, because otherwise, and as a matter of fact, even though the people, and there are few people that did, their books are beautiful. You could read them, you know exactly what he's saying. And of course, then you might realize that he's wrong. I think that one of the secrets of people that don't speak clearly is because then nobody knows if they're right or wrong. Because saying seems to be so profound, but then if you just say clearly what he's saying, then everyone would immediately realize that makes no sense. I don't know. Or maybe it does make sense, but you need to structure it differently. Anyways, that was my thought. I think that, I don't know, my experience, and it's sad, but my experience is that the people that seem to have had some education just write 1,000 times clearer, and their thoughts are clear, not only their writing. Even to this day, even the Goyish schools don't really teach much clarity of thought. So, but it still helps somewhat. not that much, somewhat.
I mean, some of it is also natural skill, right? Some people are just...
Yeah, but that was machlokes I was having with my other hobbies. I don't know if it's so much natural. I think that I don't really believe in natural skills, basically. Just like I was telling you earlier, that I don't believe in people sitting around and figuring out the truth because, the only thing that matters is the truth. It just doesn't work like that. I don't know why. I mean, I do know.
Clarity, I guess, is more of a
things we could get into get into a philosophical discussion, does that show that it's not really natural or whatever, but nothing human actually you don't even learn to go to the bathroom by yourself. What are you talking about? You're going to learn by your natural skill. No human being ever, that every single human since the times, I don't know, there's all these science fiction or philosophy fiction books of what happens if a guy grows up in a desert. Basically, you're not human. That's just how humanity works. You don't even learn how to wish your own whatever without your mother telling you. It's just not how things work. And that's basic, right? Is it more basic to know how to wipe your ass than to know how to think? Seems to me more basic. And humans do not learn that by themselves. They just don't. I don't think any humans learn that by themselves. I don't think the cavemen, they just go around dirty all day. Whatever, I don't know. It's just a fact. Sadly, culture and knowledge is part of human culture, whether you like it or not.
Right,
And that also shows you that's somewhat more contingent than what the philosophers
some people
think.
can understand someone's predisposed to, right?
Yeah, no.
No predispositions.
Yeah,
Style?
maybe. But I think that before you do it, well, I'll tell you something about dispositions, and I'm serious about this. And these are my thoughts, my opinions. You don't have to believe them.
Okay.
I think that before you spend time on both of the sides, you don't know what your disposition is. In other words, someone might come and tell you. Let's give a basic example. There's Hasidic way of being Yiddish, and there's Litvish way. Okay, and they're different, like different temperamentally different, right? Hasidim supposedly are more warm, and Litvish supposedly are more intellectual. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they say. Okay, well, it's true in some general sense, right? Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a stereotype. Now, people sometimes talk about like, okay, so which is the correct one? So, well, okay, not in reality, most people just go along with whatever they were born in, so whatever. But if anyone ever has this question, like if you go to Lakewood and like there's like two yeshivas are mixed or something, then people would say, well, it seems like some people have the temperamentally need to be Hasidish, some people temperamentally need to be Litvish, right? And what does Hasidish mean? It means basically, go to the Tish on Friday night and sing a lot of songs. And Litvish means go to the Sheikh Lily and argue with the Yeshiva. Okay. Now, it seems to be simple. The way it says, it seems to be simple that it seems to be assumed that you could sort of recognize, right? You recognize. Do you like Tishan better? Do you like, or do you like Sheikh Lili's better? Now, for the most part, most people do not, and we can get into details of this. I'm using this as a simple example because it's simple. Most people do not. Well, if you're a Litvak and your whole life you went to the Sheikh Lili, you never went to a Tish, or you went once and you didn't really get the whole culture of how it's supposed to work and everything. You can't say that my temperament is being a Litvak, because you were never exposed to that. You were never educated into that. You were never tried it, basically. So I don't think temperaments are much less useful than you think. It's like people say, follow your dream. What your dream a career? Well, until you've tried a few careers, you don't know which one you more suited for. I don't think that's not true that people by nature are suited more to different things.
Like,
no, I don't.
Not necessarily more innate, but let's say something like I'm talking about more in like artistic domains. Like
Yeah, same.
I was saying for music,
Same.
You put a bunch of people inside a musical academy, people that are deeply interested in music. And
Yes,
music,
same.
practice.
But many people.
Some do reveal a better.
It's not about revealing. It's.
Genius,
I
right?
think it's in some extremes it's obvious, but in many extremes it's not.
So we wouldn't say that about intellect, right? We wouldn't say everyone's equally intellectually powerful.
You know that
right?
actually most of the people that are amazing or top level musicians are the people that were like forced into it by their parents. It's not true that people follow the dreams.
No, that's why maybe I'm not talking about disposition in terms of appeal. I'm talking about disposition
In terms of ability, even.
Well, in terms of
there's some level of innate ability, and nobody's disagreeing with that.
Oh, okay, then that's all.
But it's mostly not enough, and it's not even enough for deciding which side of the things you are. I know so many people in so many different ways because they sort of at some point figured out what it means to be something else or to think in some other way, actually like converted to it.
No, but
or and sometimes that's not either fear because
people are naturally have. Okay, I don't need to word naturally. Whatever, people are naturally. Let's say.
In other words,
right?
in other words, let's say you ask me, some people are temperamentally disposed to think less clearly, think more poetically. Let's say it nicely instead of logically, right? Now, as long as those people did not go through 3 years to school of teaching you, like forcing you, torturing you how to speak logically, that doesn't say anything. Because I don't think that it happens this way. I think that most of humans are taught creatures. They're not innate creatures. For them, like 98% of what's going on. Of course, there's major difference, and I don't deny that people have innate abilities that are extremely different. But I think that most of the time it gets applied in wrong ways. And I think it's true. I think some people, in the olden days when people used to go to school and they used to just force everyone to take all the courses, and then people might have known which one they liked the most. But as long as you were allowed to slack in the course that you don't like, then you don't know. It's something, it's hard. Nobody said that things are not supposed to be hard. Some things are hard, or some things are more boring, or whatever. And you might actually figure out that you like it more than you like the less boring thing. It's not. I don't buy all these things. We're like, I tried. People say, people always say this. I read 2 books and now I converted to this way of thinking. Well, how about you read now 10 books that think a different way and think if you convert to them? I mean, it's like I don't think that some people have made an honest effort and things didn't work for them. Okay, but I don't know where I got into this. But for this thing, like you're talking about speaking logically, no, I think that almost everyone that is forced, and some people have to be forced. Maybe some people like naturally, okay, but almost everyone that is forced into the logic course and the composition course, whatever you call the rhetoric course nowadays. Now they changed it to English composition. Is going to benefit from it and speak and think more clearly than one before. Now, are some of them going to then say, like Nietzsche, I'm not the heck with it, I'm going to be a prophet? Okay, some of them. But he's actually a much better prophet because he's first a philologist, If he wouldn't be that, he would be a very stupid prophet. Now, he's still a stupid prophet, but at least he says it very profoundly and like very articulate. And he's actually extremely articulate, you see, for all the thing. And that comes from his classical training. It doesn't come from, you have to understand, there's something very fake in people like Nietzsche, where they they're rebelling against like the whole system where they're in. But everything they know how to do, they learn from that system. Because he's being Zarathustra. How does he even know about Zarathustra? He would have actually, the thing, people go around think, if you're Nietzschean, then you're supposed to praise like the natural, like animalistic Donald Trump guy. The problem is that Donald Trump can't be Nietzsche in a million years. Because you have to like go to a German university where they drill into your head Greek and Latin and who knows what. And they make you figure out, he was literally a philologist, that was his training. And just means like being a really yaka, where you like remember every time the word is mentioned in every book, like crazy stuff. And then you could do something else. Okay, no problem.
Your rejection of the system will be profound.
It's at least worth something. And I don't know, it's at least worth reading. The people that are like, well, according to Nietzsche, you should know. Maybe according to him, but it's not worth. You're not worth anything. But that's another point. I'm just saying that this thing that I'm saying, that most people don't think clearly, and I think that it's because they don't have an education. I still believe that. Although you could say, well, some people are not disposed to think clearly, and some people, like a very small percent of people will overcome their messed up education and think clearly, although they don't have education. That's true. But like most people won't. And I can't actually think of an example of someone that does that. Like if you take a book, like someone like Ralbag, okay? You don't have to agree with anything he says, but everything he says, everyone can understand what he says. He says it clearly, even as Perish al-Atayra. It's 100% clear. He separates things. Here I'm giving you Musar, here I'm giving you Pshat, here I'm giving you Diukim. He's so clear. The Malbim would have wished to be the Ralbag. Doesn't write half as clearly, and he does have an amazing mind and one of the greatest Mefarshim Tanakh that ever existed. But in the Jewish tradition, at least, yes. But he would have benefited from a education for sure. He's actually the one that would have benefited. He might have said less mistakes, or I don't know if he made mistakes, but he might have expressed himself much more clearly. He might have actually been useful. Nowadays, it's very hard to read him because he just doesn't write very clearly. Relatively, he writes clearly, but not anything close to the Ralbag again. Take Abarbanel. Abarbanel is a classic example. Now people hate him because he writes so long and everything. But you'd never having a mistake about what he's actually saying. It's really interesting because, like, if you read, I'm not going to say any names, but if you read other people, that might have been the same level of Talmud Chacham and everything. It's just hard to figure out what the guy is telling me. Okay, he's writing shorter, so it's faster to read, but nobody knows what the guy is saying. And it's amazing. Like, there's no Abarbanel where nobody knows what he's saying. So, okay, the Rambam, you could say, he's deliberately being obscure. Okay.
This just still, Rambam is the biggest proof that he wanted to deliberately speak clearly.
No, he definitely knew how to speak clearly. And he definitely sometimes deliberately didn't speak clearly. And actually, even the places where he tried not to speak clearly, he was much more clear than he thought he was. Because he just can't help himself. I think. And he has often different ways of tricking you, but yeah. It's like, I really wonder, like, why? No, and the smartest people among different, in like Eastern Europe or whatever, and places where nobody had any education at all, the biggest geniuses are totally messed up. And it's not because they're nothing. The Rogachev would have wished to have a real classical education. He would have actually been able to explain what he's trying to say, because he's trying to be an Aristotelian, and he's like basing it off reading Mar Nevuchim. Like, it doesn't work. It works, and you get like really interesting thoughts, but like he's really classic example of the how do you say, messed up genius, like messy genius. But there's no reason why he had to be messy. Maybe he had the nature of being a genius and this. But actually, the crazy geniuses that did have education still wrote clearly. So it's not necessarily the same thing. You could have long hair and write books that really start and begin and end, which Rogachev could not do. Okay, I don't know why I'm speaking. Well, he spoke against everyone, so we're not speaking against him. But the point is, I don't know where I'm getting this to. Anyways, I don't think that you can get certain basic things without education. I don't think. That's for sure. But people keep on trying to do this limit skills. Well, maybe they're really saying something, but just not expressing themselves. Okay, so the Chaim famously said that that's not true, but maybe it's true. But I think that. But basically, I think that human knowledge is something that you are taught. It's not something that just like any other human thing. I don't think there's anything basically, and they would actually experiment on this. For all the fantasies of people even that Arab guy wrote a book like this. I forgot his name. Even Tufel, I think, of the guy that's going to be brought up on an island and somehow find the truth. That's actually not what works. But if you brought up on an island without human contact, you're sort of a monkey. You sort of don't even raise to the level of basic. That's true. There were actually people. There were actually people that lived that way, and turned out to be sort of monkeys.
I can't put this in support of your point or against it, but there was, probably for your point, they had this thing where if you isolate human beings from a civilization for, let's say, a few hundred years, they integrate right away.
No, they don't. They don't at all. What do you think?
No, if they're born, you take an infant from a
human I didn't. That could be.
On a remote island.
Yeah,
and the guy's
maybe.
adopted
I'm not
by
sure.
an American
Maybe.
family at the age of one day.
Okay, so that I didn't say that humans don't have what used to call potentials or yeah, I didn't say that.
I think it's in support of your point.
That could be true, but it needs to the way the Rambams and their students to say is that all humans are born with great potentials or great human potentials, but in order for them to be actualized, they need work. They all need work. No, in a similar way. I mean, not in the exact same way, but they just knew the philosophical definition. Yeah, but they all said that no. The point was that no human potential. There's animal potentials are actualized just by nature of being an animal, but human potentials are actually by the nature of being human. But the nature of being human includes society, and includes deliberate action, and most people don't actually do that. So whatever you want to call them, they don't actually actualize their humanity. At least that's how they would tell it to you. But I think, anyways, why did I get onto all this? Yeah, that's why you shouldn't be an armchair smart aleck. That's why you should actually listen to other people. And then, like you're saying, that's the big interesting thing of being human. This goes back to like I was saying, the general, like Rav Sadi even talks about tradition versus truth. Because then you get to the truth. Or maybe even realize that your teacher was wrong. This is the weird, really amazing thing about teachers, about human education. Where the education has that, and this is where we start getting thoughts that humans have souls, like God, divine souls. This is literally what Aristotle thought was divine, and later on people, and the Rambam and everyone. Because humans have this really interesting ability where you get taught something, just like I was saying in the beginning, and then your connection to that thing is not to the teacher, not to the framework in which it was taught. It's to the thing, in other words, to the truth, in other words, to the object of knowledge. And it's sort of direct. It does go through the teacher or whatever it is. But that seems like you were, if you're analyzing in these terms, it seems more like Socrates would say he's just how do they say? What's the word? Mialedit. I forgot my English terms. No. No. Is a nurse that gives birth. No, what's it called? I'm forgetting. Why do I forget English words? A midwife, right? So Socrates was going on saying, "I'm a midwife." It's very interesting because in other words, I help people give birth. I'm not the mother. The insight that you have is always your own. In other words, it's always directly between you and the thing known. When it's knowledge, as long as it's belief or opinion, then it's not. Then it's I say because you said. But after you, actually, Sadigon, interestingly,
it's admitting to an external, meaning the truth that I contain at least is
yeah, because of their nature of truth is to be some sort of relation or some sort of knowledge.
External, right?
Yeah, some sort of knowledge between the knower and the known. And the person that makes it known to you becomes irrelevant at some point. Although there's no way to know it without him. You see, that's the paradox of teachers. Because, and what was I saying? Actually, the Rav Saadia Gaon, where he talks about people knowing, he gives a list of, when you read my book, you will both. So he gives these two purposes for his book. And this is also like really clear because of his list. People hate lists. I don't know. I think they're very helpful. And he tells you, I'm going to write you a book for two reasons. One is so you have arguments to win the debates with the other beliefs and so on. And the second is so you will actualize your belief. And he uses this language. So you've received beliefs, but now they're sort of potential in some sense. And then when you actually know them, then you will actualize those beliefs.
Actualize them in physical activity?
No, actualize them in knowledge. Yeah, have actual knowledge and not potential knowledge, which he sees the beliefs as. Because for him, received beliefs, what known in Arabic as taqlid, received knowledge is only some sort of potential knowledge, because it's not knowledge. Whenever you're going around saying that, it's very simple, right? If you go around saying I believe such and such because such and such told me so, right? So you don't believe such and such, or you don't know. If we skip the word belief, Saadia more or less skips the word belief. He calls them both kinds of knowledge. If you say I know that whatever, that X, because my Rebbe told me, so you don't really know X, because knowing X is the direct relation. Knowing X means I know X. Well, how do you know? Maybe through proofs or through whichever kind, one of the other ways of knowledge, through sense or through proof. Yeah, reason is of course for all these people. Well, yeah, definitely. That's the very big difference between modern theories of knowing, but that's another whole sheet. It's analogous to a sense, at least. Analogous to a sense in the same sense where knowing means. But I think it's intuitively true. I don't think if you think like a representationalist, then it's very different. But I think that representationalism is the weird idea.
There's a middle conduit between truth and
no, that knowing is just having a representation of the truth, like a picture in your mind or something like that. Yeah, they can't really think like this already. I think point is. No, because okay, I can't do this whole sheet on one side. No, can't just have a theory for how it could work. This is what happens. Anyways, what I'm saying is knowing, but I think that it's maybe even if you're representational, I think of knowledge as representational, it might be true. The point being, even if the relation is a relation of representation, whatever the relation is, it's not a relation. In other words, if you say how you know knowing something is not something that it makes sense to say knowing because someone told me. Then you just know that someone told you. You don't know the thing. Because knowing means I know that such and such. Whatever knowing means, however exactly it works.
Trust, right?
I trust. So the trust is not in the object of thought. You see that then you trust your teacher. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That trust might lead you to. It's a certain kind of. It's really hard to change the word. It's a certain kind of knowledge. That's why I call it second-hand knowledge, because you do know, or you have opinion, or whatever you want to call it. You do think that such and such is true. Okay, so you don't exactly. So you think that this is true, but you don't know that it's true, or whatever exact definition. That's what we speak about the difference between opinion and belief. Anyways, that's where it goes back to. There's some opinion and knowledge. Sorry, doxa and epistema. That's where it goes back to. But point being that if knowledge is a direct relation, some sort of direct thing that happens between me and the things know, right? If I say I know God, if there's a guy in between that you don't know God, you know that guy told you that he knows God, and you believe him, so you think there is a God, but you don't know God. That's the difference. And therefore, what was I saying? I was saying. Yeah, that's why he says that when you know things that you were taught and you know the proof to them, then you actually sort of actualize what you know. So therefore, like we were saying before, that I say that everything we know is as we know we're taught, but being taught is very different than taking on things that are not knowledge. When I'm taking on clothing or whatever, my mother teaches me to wear clothing. Well, the teaching is also maybe some sort of knowledge, but she gives me clothing to wear. Then, maybe even then, I'm not sure if my chilek is true. The point is when you're taught to know and not just to repeat what you were taught, or not just to accept what you were taught, then it sort of skips the teacher, or like you were saying, like we could say it actualizes the innate ability that you have had to know this. And in some sense, you could say, I always knew this, I never needed my teacher. My knowledge is not contingent on my teacher, and so on. That's why these thoughts that say the truth is a truth, no matter who said it, are true, because that's a definition of truth. If truth is truth because someone said it, that's not true. But truth is only known to you. The way of truth getting to you is only by someone telling it to you, and there's no other way that I know of. Even if there is a way, it's always, in other words, if someone teaches you to reason independently and so on, it was taught to you by someone. I would say that probably no one learned to reason independently. Basically, even maybe in very small steps, but the fact that we have logic nowadays, definitely when you talk about formal logic, which literally most people don't know, and they seem to sort of capture. Well, Aristotelian is one level, and now we have even more complicated level of formal logic, and those things were invented. Yeah, but even Aristotelian logic, which actually many people still don't know. Guess what? I have news for you. That's what I'm keep on saying. I think that this is something that people don't believe me when I say it. I think that the reason why people make mistakes is because they don't have logic installed on their system. It's not because they're just making a mistake. Like, so you read people, even so-called authoritative people, but definitely regular people, saying things like that are like total logical fallacies that every 3-year-old should realize, and they don't realize it. And I think the reason they don't realize it is because they never studied logic. You say, well, logic is not something that should be studied. Yes, it is. Now, after you study it, it ceases to be something that should be studied. But before you study it, does that make sense? Right. It seems like a paradox, but it's just how it works.
Because a lot of these things, this communicative means you have to go beyond its means of communication, right? Transcend that, the way that in which it's conveyed, right? To access the thing to access the thing, right? To access the truth or the method, right?
Yeah, you can.
No one's and math is maybe, I don't know if this is a good example, but no one's proud of someone who knows 2 + 2 = 4 because of the letters, right? Because of the ICS. Nobody cares, right?
I hope. Who knows?
Right. What I'm saying is,
go to a math class, you'll find out. What people actually think.
You can understand how someone can just believe in the equation as it's written, right? I mean, you can just believe in these holy
I think that
symbols,
that most children that go to school believe in math that way.
What? It's just.
Yeah, this is just the rules we have to follow.
They use the way we use numbers. I'm saying say Johnny has 2 apples and Rosa has another 2 apples. How many apples?
I actually think that some people literally don't believe in math. This is what you don't realize. You don't realize how crazy the world is, how crazy humanity is. You're assuming normal people that you think are lower level. I think that sometimes the story. This guy, there's this joke where the teacher asked the children, what's 1 and 1, what's 4 and 4, and he's like, and then he goes like, if I lend your father $100 and then I pay him 50, how much do I owe him now? And the kid goes, you owe him 200. He says, what? You don't know math? He says, no, you don't know my father. Right? Now the guy's father, I really think that now you would generally model this father as Aristotle probably would also model him as he of course knows that 100 minus 50 is 50, he just might as well make more money. I'm not sure about this. I think that this guy's model of the world is really, the guy owes me as much as I can get out of him. And math is whatever I could make it to be. I think, and I really think so. In other words, I really think that math in itself, not that, because has to do with other discussions. But I at least push in this direction because I think we pushed too much in the other direction. Math in itself, what you're talking about, the abstract knowledge of 100 minus 50, including obviously in the case where I borrowed $100 and I paid you back 50, it's 50 and not 200. That in itself is a belief, or it's an acceptance of how the world actually works, and people that always want to make the world give them their way and don't conform to how the world actually works, they do not actually believe that. They don't actually know that. I don't know the word belief. The guy really thinks in his whole life, let's be real, if you're a pragmatist, it's true. If the guy is a big bully and his whole life he figured out to get people to make 100 minus 50 be 200, it's true for him, right? That's what's true for me is. True for me. Well, that's the story. I got $200, right? And I think that's really lack of understanding of truth, of the concept of truth. I don't think the concept of truth is a simple concept. I don't think most people grasp it. At least think that there's definitely, you go to school, so when you go to school, you get it actually, and hopefully in some schools. And actually, some people that manage not to get even going to schools, and I don't think that if people would not go to school, they would have it magically.
What, this understanding of truth?
Yeah. I think that it's a big chiddush.
What's interesting about math is
I actually think it's a big chiddush. I still think that people in the limits of that make basic mistakes. Like most people think that if you say someone has cancer, they're going to have cancer more than if you say they have yana machla, which is just a confusion of how words work, right? No, I'm not joking. I'm not the first one to say this. There were ancient philosophers that made this point. And you could come up with, well, it says, what does it say? I don't know. I don't believe in that. What should I tell you? I do believe in it because I do think that it's more complicated actually how words work, at least on our mind. But
Right, that's
but the basic sense, of this is a mistake. I think that, and it's what most rationalists would tell you. You don't understand how words work, and most people don't understand. People feel that there's something wrong with saying things that are true, that are obviously true. And cancer is a good example because it never helps someone to say that they don't have cancer, as far as I know. And definitely to call it by euphemisms don't help anyone. Doesn't help anyone. No less people died, and I don't think that the studies that were done show that Charedim that say Yana Machla die less or something like that. I don't think. So it obviously doesn't work, and you're still doing it because you just don't innately understand how the world works, how the world doesn't care about what you say about it. And, Freud called it the reality principle. He said that it's a stage. Anyways, I think that most people didn't get to that stage yet, at least in the extremes of it.
Pursue a random digression.
Anyways, Sean, that was enough for this. I don't know what I said today.
Math, to me, there was when I think about how I think about math, it is interesting. There's a point at which, I realized in my own mind, I lose grasp of mathematics as a means of reference, right? Meaning 2 + 2 = 4 is an easy visualization exercise. Right, I can take two apples in my mind. I just can visualize the 4. I can probably do it up to 9. 10 already gets hard. You have to make 2 rows of 5 in my mind. Right, there is a point where I'm doing some sort of, I don't know. It's not maybe it's synthetic knowledge, but some means of just now that I understood the intuitive principles.
Yeah, people talk about this.
But then there is a point that I have a munah pshuta in math.
No, people.
Right? I have a munah pshuta in the Pythagorean Theorem. I don't quite.
Yeah,
know
people. So this is okay, but people talk about this how number one, in a certain level of study, things become obvious, and secondly, that certain proofs, there's different kind of proofs in math, and certain kinds of proofs are actually meant to show you that it must be so. So you get to actually believe that it's true, whatever it is, the Pythagorean Theorem.
Right, and to me it was interesting because when I was in school, they wanted
you believe
to
it because other people do.
I'm saying this is something that everybody finds irritating. I don't know if they can express it clearly, but I don't know if I can express it clearly, but when you do certain math equations, and you do them in a certain way that the teacher doesn't like, show your work and it has to be done in a certain way. Maybe it's good that they teach it to be done in this way, but to me, I felt like there were principles, or if I modified the way I did the equation in a certain way, I actually understood, and then I understood the teacher's reason. Yeah. But I also understood how the mathematical procedure corresponds to how the reality is divided and or multiplied or whatever it is.
Okay.
Right? No, but just in school, they don't teach you to do this. They don't teach you mathematics as a means of grasping the internal function of mathematics, at least not in elementary school. Even in high school, we were told you have to show, when you do division, show how it works in a certain way. Even though, it's funny, there's an interesting exercise where you tell somebody to add 9 consecutively to a certain number. No. They don't realize that there's a simple procedure of, this is actually an entirely unrelated point I just realized, but it's much easier to add 10 and subtract 1. Right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, try it. Add 9 to 9, and then add 9 to 18, then add 9.
Okay, what's the point of this?
It's easier if you just say 9 plus 10 is 19 minus 1 is 18. Now, I'm not sure how I got there.
Yeah, what's the point of that? But this is mostly, I think this is mostly, how do you call it? It's mostly... No, what I'm saying is a way of understanding mathematics, how it pertains to objects, right? And we use examples of reality to understand this, to show that an 18th is greater than a 19th. I could believe in the principle. Right. So wait, but there's I have what to tell you. There's thoughts about this, but what's the point that we're getting at now?
No, it was just a kvetch about mathematics in school. That's all.
Yeah, because schools are mostly teaching people in the manipulative way, even for math.
That's what I'm saying. Even for math, that to me was interesting.
Yeah, even for math. And actually understanding what understanding is and how there could be abstract understanding, whatever, is a whole discussion. It's a whole thing. Anyway, yeah.
Well, like ontologies of epistemology,
whatever. I don't think it's relevant to what we're talking about.
3 steps. You have to at least have you have to believe three things really to believe in knowledge at all. I mean, you have to believe in your mind's ability to perceive knowledge, that the world has a quality of knowledge, and that those two are somehow made for each other, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unless you go in one of these like
I'm not talking about
reductive ways where there's no such thing as knowledge, basically.
Okay.
It just
No,
makes
I'm saying is I don't buy like the
works.
cheap anthropic principles and stuff like that. I never understand. Maybe I don't understand them, but to me, if I did understand them, I think they're stupid. Like it's just inevitability. You're just making an appeal to inevitability.
No, that's a different question. Okay, I can't do everything at once.
Sorry, I'm a little ADHD.
Can't do everything at once. Can't do everything at once. Can't do everything at once. We have to keep on subject. Maybe we'll figure it out. To keep on subject. I just said one point. That when you learn stuff and then we figure out through those stuff we get connection to the truth. There's actually in my ADHD it connects to a lot of other discussions about talk about the Menes Chachamim because that's very important. Because most people tend to make the midwife into the mother. That's like basically a basic mistake of it. Anyways.
Well, with the Menes Chachamim, especially now.
Yeah, because it's true. In other words, this is because people make both. Let me just say it clearly in this framing that I have because it's helpful for me. People have both mistakes of this, both sides of the mistake, and it's very important. Both the apikarsim, whatever, seem to think that you can give birth without a midwife, which, well, okay, Shivram Pua claimed that you could, so I can't blame that point, but you can't. And there's nice theory, nice fantasies of like all these. What's the guy's name?
To access the truth like directly.
Yeah, no, directly is no.
You're saying you can.
No, you must, but you can't. Again,
no,
both.
I can't do it. I'm saying.
You're right. Both people seem to imagine that you could have truth without learning it from someone, and or that
someone is the truth. That's the other option.
Yeah, or wait, and the religious people think that listening to someone is the truth. So these are the two sides of the same mistake, or the same mistake, the two mistakes that people make. Right? And the truth is that there's a paradox going on. Or it's not really a paradox, they just call it a paradox, where there's no human thing happens. It might be a paradox. We get into philosophy of if which one is true. But the truth is, or at least the facts of the matter for the most part are that no human ever learned anything by himself. That's false. I mean, we could handle details, but that's true. Everything that anyone ever learned was through a teacher, and that anyone that ever learned anything from a teacher didn't care about what the teacher said, but about what the truth is. In other words, didn't learn. When you're learning from a true teacher, is not learning the teacher; it's learning the truth. It's just that. Now, these are somewhat contradictory. And I think that there's a bunch of different theories that try to collapse this paradox and say like, well, people don't really learn anything; it's all language games, or to say the opposite, where people know everything by themselves. Both of these sides seem to be false. So how exactly is the theory that makes these two things work? I don't know. I'd give you the Aristotelian theory of the midwife of the potentials and actualizing potentials, which seems to solve this problem. You could have different solutions of ways of answering the problem. You could do Platonist answer of recollection. You could do different answers, but that's the basic facts. The facts that we have to remember. Wait, don't say anything. That's just the basic facts. The basic facts are that nobody ever learned anything without a teacher. So you need a teacher. Don't go around saying you could learn anything without a Rebbe. You need a Rebbe. In order to have a Rebbe, you need to believe the Rebbe. Because the point of a Rebbe is that you should believe him. If you can have a Rebbe and say prove at every line, he's not going to be your Rebbe. In other words, he's never going to move you past where you're stuck. And that's what many people are stuck in that, both regarding living teachers and regarding books, which can sometimes replace teachers if you do them correctly. Many people, actually most people are stuck in that. Most people, even they read Rambam, they read their own Rambam, they don't read what it says, and so on. And the other side of people, which do take the Rebbe seriously, are stuck in the opposite problem where they never learn the truth, which is then there's no point in being a teacher if you're just teaching them yourself. I mean, thank you very much. Now I'm going to be your chassid. What's the point of being someone's chassid? The point of being a chassid is because it teaches you the truth. So these are the two sides of the paradox, and we need to remember that both of these sides are true, and we could think of different theories of how it might work or whatever, but it's still true that these both things are true.